Hi everyone, my name's Angelica Hofstad and we're about to start the second session of the day. It is my absolute pleasure to start the next session on climate resolutions, ending the war on the natural world. Above me you'll see the code for Slido, so please feel free to drop in any questions that you might have during the session or answer any live polls as well that we might have going on. I want to welcome everybody here in the fantastic audience in Glasgow, as well as everybody sitting at home attending digitally as well through our platform. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the speakers for this amazing session: Dewey Valiente, Jamie Hunter, Diana Lopera, Durbla Ashok, and Maya Sanbar. Fantastic, quite a large panel today, so do bear with us, a lot to look at. Before I start with the questions, we have a few questions that I'd love to engage you guys on. Then we will engage the audience as well, both here and digitally as well. But before that, I'd like to maybe just start with Dewey and then go on with everybody on stage and do a 2-minute introduction on who you are, why you're here, and yeah, let's start.
Perfect. My name is Dewey Valiente, but you can call me Dewey. It's much easier, like Kiwi, but with a D. And I'm part of the indigenous Guna people from Panama. I am also the head of sustainability at the Ministry of Tourism in Panama, and I've been working as a climate activist since the first time I went to One Young World in Dublin. I work specifically with indigenous peoples to make awareness and inspire action on climate change through art, but most specifically empowering women and local communities. We have been talking about climate change for so long, and there is still a lot of people that don't know what climate change is. And I feel that through art that connects you, makes you feel, and it doesn't matter what language it is, you can then actually start taking action if you get inspired. Thank you.
Awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Ashok. I come from Pakistan. I am attending COP because I think it's really important that the voices, especially young voices from Global South, are represented. I'm working with a foundation called Plant for Planet, and as the name suggests, we have just one mission: we plant for planet. So we have been working in the space since 2009, and trying to push planting to a whole new level, and excited to be here and looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maya Sanbar. I'm a multimedia artist, and I've recently made a film called Footsteps on the Wind that is very much addressing the issue of refugees, climate and conflict refugees, and the effect the climate is having on us as a population. It is something that I work very much on in all of my work: storytelling, a way of raising awareness and pushing to action. So that's why I'm here on the panel, and that's why I'm here at COP.
I'm Jamie Hunter, and I am here really representing Stop Ecocide, and specifically the Canadian branch of that campaign, which I co-founded. Yeah, basically the idea is to criminalize mass destruction of the environment, and really I'm here at COP to push that forward as much as possible, and yeah, really excited to be here with these other amazing panelists. Thank you.
Aloha mai kako, hafa day and kamusta. My name is Diana Lopera. I am originally from the island of Saipan, but today I am here as part of the World YMCA delegation, youth delegation. There are about over 20 of us from across the world, youth leaders who have shown, who have done a lot of work in youth-led solutions. And so I come from Hawaii. Yeah, and currently I work with the state of Hawaii's Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission as their climate change communication specialist. I work with various groups and communicate climate change in a way that is digestible, in a way that is accessible, in a way that is relatable in the context of Hawaii. Nice to meet you all. I'm super excited to be a part of this panel.
I think a round of applause for everybody here. I think definitely needed. Amazing, amazing group of speakers today. So let's just get started. I think the first question that I wanted to ask you all, really considering that we're here at COP26 in Glasgow, you know, the IPCC stated in its sixth report that a certain amount of the global warming is locked. It's irreversible. It's going to happen. That means that global temperatures are likely to rise in the 1.5 degrees within the next 2 decades, regardless of what we do. You know, while discussions have been around for a lot of time, we keep talking about the same issues, and the climate emergency we're facing, we don't seem to change our behavior, and that's really why we're here. And I really just wanted to hear a little bit from all of you on what ways would you consider are the most effective in making people understand that climate urgency is actually needed. We need to take action. It's something that we need to start acting on and actually believing in this and taking those steps. So anybody who wants to start, really.
Well, I can start. The first time I heard about climate change, I didn't know that my islands were going to disappear. And the more I started learning, the more I realized, as you said, that this is something that we cannot control anymore. What we have to do now is start looking for collaborative solutions, trying to work with the communities, trying to work in different fields, because by ourselves we cannot do this together. We have to unleash the power of art, science, technology, media, business, and then we can maybe start looking for a brighter future. And I think it's very important to give a voice to women, to the youth, and to indigenous people, because indigenous people have so much knowledge. They have been in contact with nature for so long, for centuries. We have accumulated all this knowledge through our chants, through our dances, through our language, and all this is at the risk of being lost, not only because of climate change, but because of the lack of connection we have with nature. So I think we have to go back to our roots and learn where we come from, so we can realize where we're going.
Let me add one thing. Like, I read this recently that like 75% of the forests are protected by indigenous people, right? So it's really important when we're talking about, okay, because the organization that I work with, we have a big forest in Mexico, and we are working with indigenous people there to support it. So it's really important that the finance is there. Like a couple of days ago, there was like a finance day in COP. So when we look at what kind of solutions are already out there, most of the times what happens is you are not actually providing the means for those solutions to thrive on. You can say, okay, these are there already, but at the same time, I think looking at a financial perspective is also very important, like how can we improve the situations on the ground. So thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that about mentality, about mind frame, what you said earlier. I think it's very important to change the way that we think about it and raise awareness through art and financial structures that can enable it. Engaging with the youth and indigenous populations is really very important because they're at the forefront. And at the same time, I think encouraging and also forcing the government, because governments are really the people who are in charge at the moment, and it's about changing. Someone earlier was saying, you know, from an astronaut's point of view, looking at the planet Earth and thinking, how do we work together rather than against each other, and looking at our interests as a planet, and looking at the planet as this floating rock on the universe, and that we are not just passengers, we are the crew of this ship going through outer space, and how do we keep this planet well and healthy and alive, and changing that mentality and putting pressure on the governments, as well as through art and culture, shifting that mentality and engaging with people to become really passionate about it in a way that is engaging rather than guilt-ridden, or we must do this. It's more about really taking it inside within your soul and saying, this is what we're doing, rather than this what we should be doing. So shifting that mentality is really key, I think.
Yeah, to build on that, I would definitely add that, you know, kind of consciously or subconsciously, we kind of follow what those in power are doing and saying, and so we really need those in positions of power, you know, in government, but I'd say also in business and in other positions of power to step up and really change their mindset around it and change what they're doing, and in that way it'll be more possible for others to follow. Right now we're seeing most of the leadership coming from those who are not in positions of power generally.
Yeah, and so when we talk about communicating climate change and bringing out the urgency of what that is, we have to think about what that means for different people, right? So when I was getting my education as a scientist and trying to figure out what does it mean to be a scientist, I realized early on was that there's this huge gap between the amazing science and the data that's being accumulated and the translation of that into real world solutions. And so I realized you can have the best data in the world, the data that might have the answers that we're looking for, but if we're not able to translate that to the right audiences in a way that they understand and they can transform into actual real world applications, then that won't get us anywhere, right? And I just want to build upon what Dee was saying and Maya about the power of indigenous peoples. And looking into the past to see our future. So I'm from the Pacific Islands, and so we can really look into how they have lived for hundreds of years by utilizing the limited resources they have in their islands without much contact from the outside world, and how they have utilized it in a way that will sustain themselves not only for their current generation but for generations to follow. And so looking into these different avenues can really help us shape and communicate what we need to do to move forward.
I love that you say that. I think your point about science and the data and what do you do with that data. And there's been so much talk in the last couple of years with everything that's been going on with the news about what is the truth. You know, how do we find the truth with all the information that we're being shown and thrown at us? What is the truth? And I think there's an engagement that we can all take, whether we're artists or filmmakers like me, or whether you're working on a project or you have your own Instagram account or your own social media, and how do you manage and translate that into data that you send out there. And I work a lot with scientists, and I'm developing that more and more with art and science, shortcutting some of the data, because the data can be hard to look at and quite boring for some people to really assess. And I think really finding ways, but it's the crucial truth. So how do you find that in a way to translate that through art and information is really key, I think, and engaging and empowering to do that. And pushing that truth, your own truth, as observers and as well as and people that are engaging in this in a powerful way. And the power is in our hands to do that. It's a matter of just getting out and doing it, like you are all here today. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, just feeding off a little bit of what you just said there, I feel like, and maybe being a bit thought-provocative, you all work in so many different areas here. We have a really cool wide range of areas and sectors here. You spoke about being collaborative, you spoke about changing mindsets and adjusting your speech to your audience and to your demographics. How do each of you individually deal with people that, for example, just deny what is happening? How do you accommodate to those people? I think it'd be interesting to understand, as well as an audience perspective, to understand how can we then as well adjust ourselves and take away these insights and do this on our day-to-day as well.
How about I start on this? So I was actually attending a workshop just yesterday, and this question come up over there as well. So usually this is also I found to be true, that if you say data, that might not work for all the audience. Okay, this is what the average temperature has been for 500 years, and look at this now. So that might not work with all the audience. So what really works, or I found to work, is basically see, okay, what that person cares about, right? For example, let's say I come from a highland, so I like my greenery. So there was this gentleman yesterday who was talking about Yorkshire, basically in UK, and he was saying basically how they are facing droughts, and there was a recent wildfire there as well. So that is something the local care about. Obviously, they have been growing up there for quite some time now. They like the fauna and the fauna that's there, the ecosystem that's there. So if you link the climate change directly to that and how it's affecting them indirectly, then you can start to have that conversation, like what we can do about this. And through that, you can engage them in a bigger picture rather than saying, okay, these are the hardcore data that's being put forward by scientists. So you really need, like, I think you really need to see what people care about and how you can link that. Like, obviously, it might not work all the time, but this is, I think, this starts the conversation actually, and then you can move forward with it. So yeah.
And I think when you find like what people care about and you get people to become emotional about stuff, then they can start taking action. That's why for me, the work I've been doing the last 6 years is very focused on art, and we have worked already with over 30 artists, which we bring into my islands to work together in workshops with the indigenous people, because even they didn't know what climate change was. Like the indigenous people that are losing their islands, I didn't know what climate change was. And it's difficult to explain science, and it's difficult to understand that you will have to lose your whole lifestyle because of something that you didn't cause. We produce 0 emissions. Panama is a carbon negative country. But still, we are facing this problem, and I think through art and through making people feel, we can start changing the mindset.
Yeah, I think emotion is key, absolutely, to kind of engage with it. And informing and engaging from the heart is very important. Yeah, I think it's a moment in which you want to engage the world leaders where it hurts, you know, like where does it hurt, and understanding where, because the people who are really responsible for it are, you know, the US, Europe, and China, and those three big blocks need to really work together and find solutions rather than competing, because the nations like yours, for example, that are being affected are the ones that are not causing it. So how do we again go into this kind of planetary view, and that these strong natures that have the strongest GDP, and how do they take responsibility for it? And it's very interesting because the United Nations was created like 75 years ago after the Second World War, thinking no more wars, that's why we're doing the United Nations. And I've recently done an exhibition with the UN for UNHCR, and the people there are really working hard to make the world a better place, but the governments are very much, they use their veto power. It's very crippling for the United Nations to do the work that they really want to do. So it's really going back to that 70 years ago, we wanted to work together as a planet, and how are we isolating each other again, and finding a way around to going back to that initial, we are together on this planet, how do we make that work on a governmental level, and putting pressure on our, like, write to your MPs, write to people, like, do everything that you can do, because it all matters, it all counts.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of building off that with people who might deny climate change. It really is all about connections. How can we connect with them? And I think a lot of the time they're denying it because they're fearful of something, whether it's the future that might happen if we don't do something, or whether it's because they're worried about their job, or something like that. And really connecting with them and coming up with solutions. And I think a lot of the time people are scared to really think about this because we often don't talk about solutions. We just talk about the problem, and that's difficult for people to really connect with.
Yeah, and it's so hard to start talking about the solutions if we don't even start these conversations, right? So it starts with a conversation. So just something that you guys all touch on is connection, right? Connecting the dots to climate change. Climate change is not an isolated issue. It encompasses so many different issues that we are facing around the world today. It's a socio-economic issue, an environmental issue. There's connections to public health. So when we talk about climate change, it's important that we build upon these issues that people are already familiar with, right? Because climate change, oh yeah, it's so big, we have all these big data, but what does that mean for me? And sometimes that's hard to make those connections if the data shows super wide, like big scale, super big scale findings, but then there's not really that connection to the individual. So just connecting the dots and finding that that connection, and then you can start to begin that conversation. And when we have that conversation, well, we can start to be on the same page, and then we can all move forward to see what we can do to start talking about the solutions.
If I can just add, we have been focused on the problem for so long, and I think now it's time to focus on the positive things that this climate crisis is bringing, you know? We have more renewable energy in most of the countries. Renewable energy is cheaper every year. You have the possibilities to have this whole ecosystem protected, because now we understand that they are valued. So it's a very important moment to start regenerating the ecosystems, but also regenerating ourselves, getting in contact with our own nature. And I think that is going to be a key to fight climate change.
Yeah, I love what you both just said, in that sense of how do you make the solutions your own, and how do you take it into your own daily life. And I find that there's so many more solutions that are out there, but also in the way that we live our lives, and in the way that you, like, imbuing ourselves and the next generation, but really ourselves. If we just think about how much plastic wrapping do we have on our products, and how do we choose the option of going to a market where we can just get the fruit without the plastic packing. I mean, if you think about all the rubbish that you do in your daily life, that's a kind of drop in the ocean. But if we all start behaving that way, and then set that example for the people around, that's a kind of build-up snowball effect. So at an individual level, what you were talking about earlier, that solution is in your own life, what you can do, but then spreading the word in terms of influence. But if you imbue it within your own life, then you feel a bit more empowered to go and push it more, because you're walking the talk in that sense.
Absolutely. I feel like as well, focusing on solutions that you all mentioned, focusing on that positive solution, how to get out of this problem that we're in, and touching as well on what Maya mentioned earlier about the huge differences and unbalance north-south and the responsibilities between all of our countries, and who exactly creates all of these emissions and all of the different consequences. You know, the World Bank has estimated that climate change and the issues that we're facing today could push millions and millions of people into extreme poverty by 2030, which is this huge deadline that we're all looking at. What is required by, you know, all of these different stakeholders that we've mentioned here, so government, communities, individuals, all of the different parts of the communities that we do have to involve. How can we create this, the fact that the disproportionate affecting low-income communities specifically can be resolved? How can we address that? I know there was a lot of words and thoughts in that. If that wasn't clear, let me know.
Can you repeat it?
I'm so sorry. How can we solve the fact that low-income communities are actually a lot more impacted by climate change, and the fact that, you know, climate change is going to push a lot of people into extreme poverty? How can we address that now with all of the stakeholders that we have?
I mean, I've got to say, I made a film about that, in the sense that it was really interesting during COVID times how, you know, some people got vaccine earlier than other people. There's an imbalance in the world. Whatever we do at the moment, there's a big imbalance, whether it's financial, economic, opportunity-based as well. Opportunities are not there for many people and many nations as well, who are just as bright and just as capable, and there is that disproportionate view. It's about raising awareness of it. So, you know, there's going to be more and more poverty linked to climate change. There is, you know, crops are drying up. We all know this. There's going to be more refugees, climate refugees. In that sense, how do we welcome them? How do the nations responsible and stronger create a structure in which people are respected and welcomed in a way in which they can contribute to new societies, in a way that we all respect each other as human beings, and, you know, one race, which is the human race, and how do we work together on that? So again, mind frame, but I would say in terms of the question is, how do we do it? We do it by talking in all grassroots organizations and then partnering those up with larger organizations and social responsibility. So the social responsibility of these larger organizations having to partner and mentor and work with grassroots organizations, that's a really important thing that we can start to push for, is pairing up. You know, if you're doing work in a certain country, then you have to pair up with this other grassroots organization, and you have to do this, and creating a structure in which we push for these kinds of concrete steps to take place.
Just a note there, sorry, and I'll give you the word, but for example, you touched on the grassroots initiatives, all of these projects, but they all are also disproportionately impacted by green funding, for example, so just an added layer of complication into that solution as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I'm thinking they need to be partnered up. You have to have this kind of pairing and responsibility that if you're doing work in a certain country as a big organization, very well funded, then you have to do certain things with grassroots organizations and empower them. There has to be some kind of system in which we do that on a concrete level.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that leading change from the grassroots, but at the same time, I think it was mentioned a bit earlier as well, that there are financial constraints. Like the power lies with not the young people or people who are in the front line. So for example, like my country, Pakistan, right? So I've been working with the government, the Ministry of Climate Change, and the Standing Committee on Climate Change, again some technical terms here. But I've been working with them for the past 2 years. And one of my main agenda is to bring more young people on the table, so that can be a very effective way to communicate, okay, because most of the frontline people or the young people or the indigenous people are working on the front line, but they are not being supported by the government, right? Unless they are on the table, and not just because of show that they need to fill, like, let's say, 2 seats with indigenous people or young people. They are not just there to fill basically tick marks and stuff that, okay, you had this presence, okay, that's it. You need real commitments from the government that, okay, they are not only just including them on the table just for the sake of it, but also like taking this a different perspective, because like country like Pakistan and neighboring countries in the South Asian region, we talk about climate change as an isolated matter, that okay, you might get higher temperature, but then you're not looking at the other trickling down effects, the increase in diseases, tropical diseases. You will have trouble with your food crops, the production will go down, you will have issues with fresh water, for example, right? So these are compounding effects. And it in terms of national security as well, like all of these things come under threat. If you look at from, let's say, 15 years down the road, so all of these things are a very, very real possibility. So just changing a bit dynamics as well, I think it's also a good way, but at the same time, like continuing the grassroots organizations and grassroots level movements is also a very important key to bring down that pressure, but at the same time engaging with the people who have the power and trying to get what you want on the table. You want your representatives, like whatever works. So yeah. Thank you.
And so, like, what are like the frameworks and the policies we have with our current governments and our current world leaders? What do they have for these marginalized communities? So, for example, as sea level rise continues to take our coast in Hawaii, the people that live in Hawaii, that live in these coastlines, who may not have the resources to adapt and move more inland, what do we have in place? What process do we have for them in order to not continue to carry the burden of the impacts of climate change when they are the ones that least contribute to it, right? And then another example, in the United States, we're pushing for electric vehicles. We want to move away from gas, from fossil fuel use, but then not everyone can afford electric vehicles, right? So how can we make sure that we continue to reach our climate goals that we promise, but then not leaving those that cannot be a part of the solutions behind, right? So just looking into the process of when we talk about adaptation, when we talk about mitigation, who does that include? And more importantly, who does that not include? Yeah.
I also think, just to add something, we have to start looking for new economic models that actually empower people and are based on traditional knowledge and the knowledge of their ecosystems, in order to find new ways of improving the lives of these communities and giving them access to finance that is really sustainable and not just someone giving money for the sake of it.
Yeah, I really like that, Dewey. So when I was in undergrad, my thesis was centered in Loko'ia Oheia, which is an 800-year-old native Hawaiian fish pond. And this fish pond once provided sustenance for over 1 million people of Hawaii. And so looking at this other places of knowledge, there's this native Hawaiian proverb, an olelo no eau. I can't say the original proverb, but basically it roughly translates to not all knowledge is learned in one school. And so looking into sources of knowledge, not just from the institutions that we are familiar with through through like schools, but looking into the communities, these indigenous communities, and see what they have done. Like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, you know, like to look for new solutions, because we have the solutions. We just gotta find out where these solutions lie and learn from what they have done and see what works for them and see how we can look at it and how we can make it work for our respective communities.
I love that. I love the proverb that you use. I think that's a really good takeaway from all of this conversation. It doesn't all come from the same place, and we just need to integrate it, and fair share of accountability and involving every part of the community in this conversation ultimately. I wanted to obviously open up the conversation to the audience. Before we do that, I just want one last question from you guys. What would you consider to be the two most effective actions that young people today can take away from this conversation, from COP26, from this day right here, right now? What can we do to fight this and actually get some action going? No pressure at all. It's just two.
What can we do? I mean, obviously we're doing a lot already. Like, everyone here, the fact that we're here means that we care and means that we're pushing for action. You can see that there are so many youth groups around COP right now that are not waiting, that will no longer be silent, right? Like, we will no longer wait for us to grow up, to have the fancy titles, to have the years of experience, because climate change, we are experiencing it already. And so what we are doing, what our words are so valid, because this is the futures that we will be inheriting, that we will inherit tomorrow. And so climate change is not going to wait for us to grow up, so why should we, Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely echo that very strongly. I would say kind of two things. I'd say action and learning. So take action in some way. Find something which really speaks to you and take action on it. And then alongside that, learn and expand your kind of knowledge about what we can do and what the solutions are. And I guess those two kind of sum it up quite well.
Yeah, I love that. I would say empower yourself, because you are a drop in the ocean, but the drop in the ocean, every single drop makes the ocean. The ocean doesn't exist without the drop. So decide on what kind of drop you want to be. Do you want to be one that has certain kinds of elements to it or another? Find the one thing that you are passionate about. Like, there's so many different areas to this solution. So we're not going to call it the problem anymore. We're going to call it the solution. And find part of the solution that you want to be a part of, and then become really passionate about it. Join a group that is passionate about that very same thing. And as you come together, you grow that. So I would say a takeaway to anyone who's joining this challenge is you have the power in your hands. And I think everyone's realizing that. And with social media and with how we can cross borders through messages, I mean, the way that we can communicate worldwide on certain key issues. So it's not about what nation you belong with, and it's about what cause you believe in. So it's cross-national, about a cause and about one solution that you want to be a part of. So decide on that, go for it, live it in your everyday life, and it will make you happy. It'll make you happier to be doing something, because you feel like, oh my God, this thing is on my shoulders, it's so huge and I can't do anything about it. You can shift that mentality into, I can do something, and it is so true, so possible. I mean, everyone here and everyone who's here at COP, there's so many people out on the street doing things, and all of that really does make a difference, and it does put pressure, but it also, working with scientists and government, finding those solutions. The Dalai Lama, I worked on a project with him, he said to me, you know, when you're good and doing good actions and kindness, it's not that it's good for other people, it's just good for yourself. Because it creates really good, again, science, it creates really good vibes in your brain, and your brain makes a healthier person. So just do it for yourself just as much as for everyone around you and the planet as well. Yeah.
So our organization, right? So it's just one goal, right? Plant a tree. So there have been many reports on this, that there's massive deforestation, right? And we have been working on afforestation. So according to, just sharing some stats, according to some reports that have come out, it has been estimated that the world has lost like 3 trillion trees since couple of hundreds of years. So that's quite massive. Now there's around like 3 trillion trees, and that's one of the goals for our organization as well, to get to at least 4 trillion trees within the century, right? So plant a tree, that's very easy to do. Don't just plant it, also make sure it's sustaining, you're giving it watering, not for photo shoot and then just forgetting about it, right? Take care of it. And just wanted to just bring in quite a different perspective into the action oriented that we're talking about, okay, what you can do. Like there has been talk, okay, we are connected, we are hyper connected, we can send across messages. But one thing that we do forget often are the children, right? They have the right to be in a world that gives them the same level of support that we, as we are growing up, had, right? They had playgrounds to play with, they had greenery to enjoy, they can go out camping, they can enjoy beaches, they can go up in mountains, experience snow, and XYZ, the other elements as well. So, like thinking about this problem in terms of that, it's really important, like what we can give our future generations, yeah? So just wanted to share that, because it's really personal to me, that what we have been doing for the last couple of years and what the science is telling us, and even though it's quite clear, there hasn't been enough action, and we all can take action, collective action, like you must have heard about this, yes? So plant a tree and like stop talking, start planting. So thank you.
That's very beautiful. And in my culture, when you are born, they plant a tree in your name. So I think that's something that we have been doing for centuries, and now like the scientists and the governments are also following our steps. So following up on Jamie, educate yourself about these issues, get to know what's happening not only globally but also locally, because I'm pretty sure that even though you are not Latin American or not so developed country, even in England and in all these areas, you are facing problems related to climate change. So educate yourself, because it will take you far. And it doesn't matter what age you are. And if you're young, the more you educate yourself, the better chances you will have to have a seat on the table. Right now, the Panamanian Delegation, the average age of the delegators is 29 years old. The main negotiator is 29 and he's gay. The second in charge is 25 and she's a woman. So we are seeing now already that generational change. But that wouldn't have happened if they wouldn't have been studying about climate change for the last 10 and 6 years, you know? So be aware that the people that are sitting on the table right now don't have the same capabilities to learn as you have. So you can learn and make yourself more educated about climate change and the actions you can take, but also act. When in Panama, 4 years ago, we were passing a law to ban plastic bags, the president forbade the law. He didn't think it was a good law at that time. And when I realized that, when I got the news from a WhatsApp group, I decided to do something. And I created a campaign on change.org, and within hours we had thousands of signatures. And afterwards, we were able to go as a unified group of different NGOs and different scientists to tell the legislators that the law had to be passed. And nowadays, the law is a reality. We don't have plastic bags in Panama. But that was because of this small step of making a small text, putting in change.org, and sending it to a bunch of people. So educate yourself and start acting.
I mean, amazing. Just to wrap up, basically, keep learning, plant a tree, talk to people around you, be a drop, and act now. Just action is now, don't wait. I'm just going to open up the floor now to a few questions. Just raise your hand if anybody has a question. If not, I'm more than happy to just direct the questions to our digital attendees as well, who I'm sure have a few questions. I'll give you my mic.
So we have loads of questions coming in online. The first one I wanted to pose to you guys has been sent in by Dia from India, who's wondering whether it is possible to combine economic growth with protecting our natural world.
Yeah, I think we come back to the solutions, that there are. Nature is strong. She's stronger than we think. Like, if you leave the sea alone and if you leave the earth alone, it comes back very strongly. We just need to leave it a little bit, to kind of recover and clean it up. The sea, clean it up and let it recover, and plant. And at the same time, you want to encourage economic growth because that's jobs and that's people's livelihoods. And how do you find that balance? Is really to do with government and scientists working together again, and talking about solutions that you were talking about earlier. I think it's doable, but you have to be very clever and think it through. And I think that's what we're here at COP trying to do. I think people are here honestly trying to find that balance.
I think that tourism, for example, is a way that we have been ignoring for a while in order to solve climate change and to make an impact on people. All of us travel in our countries, to other countries, and when we travel, we get to experience a different environment, and we get to learn more about the world, and we get to understand that at the end, we are all connected. So if we allow for a new tourism model, a model that is based on the traditional knowledge of the people, a model that is based on regenerating the last wild places on Earth, a model that is based on empowering communities. If we make them know that what they have is very valuable, then they can start creating new activities and experiences and tourism products that can change the mindset of people, but also will generate an economic impact in their communities.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible to connect economic growth and addressing the natural world, right? Like, for example, in Hawaii, usually when we think of Hawaii, we think of this paradise, right? This vacation getaway. And so it's really driven by tourism here back in Hawaii. And right now there isn't that strong connection with the land, right? It's more of like a vacation rental, but what, like Dio was saying, we need to reform how we view tourism in a way that brings the indigenous peoples and the locals into the conversation, rather than something that is like a one-way connection for the people that travel, right? Because when people travel to Hawaii, they tend to just go to the beaches, but then there isn't really like that conversation about the history of Hawaii and the indigenous people and what they have done before everything that's happened. And so, yeah, just finding that connection and finding that balance, like what you're saying, to ensure that the people that live in these islands and I guess wherever communities that you are able to sustain themselves and their families, but also ensure that we don't leave behind the solutions that we have been fighting for so long.
If I can just add, the mindset of people is changing already. People don't want anymore just to go and lay down and tan the whole day. You, young people, and the people that are more conscious, something we call the discerning traveler, want to experience the life of the communities, want to learn from the community, want to understand their ways of living. So there is a huge trend that's going to change the way we interact with visitors and the way we interact with communities. And I think it's a great opportunity to understand what we can do at an individual level and we can bring back to our countries or to our own cities to start changing everything.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to give you another question that is directed to you, Diana. Ben from the UK is asking, Diana, you are in Glasgow all the way from Hawaii. After coming such a long way, have you found your time productive here thus far? And how about the other speakers who've come a far way as well?
Well, thank you, Ben, for the question. I actually just came November 4. I'm still very jet lagged. Half of my mind is not here, but but yeah, it's been quite. I'm super grateful for this opportunity, and so this is my first panel. I haven't really gotten the chance to go out, but I'm super excited to see, to learn, to share my story, first of all, about my story in Hawaii and Saipan, the Pacific Islands, but to also learn about the stories of other people and learn about what they have done, what their perspective is, and to help, just to have these conversations, right? Because, for example, the perspective that I know best is from a Pacific Islander. And when we think about climate change, we think about a collaborative solution. And this requires us to have these conversations and take account these different perspectives. And I hope that through my time here in Glasgow, I can connect with people from all around the world and I can learn from them and hopefully that they can learn from me as well.
Thanks a lot. We also have a question here that's directed to you, Maya. It's from Unelka from Kenya, who's wondering if you can recommend any young filmmakers who are doing really important work that we should be following and supporting.
Wow, I think that's a great question. It depends. There's so many different voices out there and filmmakers. I would say, look at what you resonate with, looking at the film festivals that are out there. So at the moment, there's Climate Crisis Film Festival. My film's there's lots of films that are in that festival. So support the film festivals that are promoting these films, and look at the ones that you resonate and follow those filmmakers. And if you have any interest in filmmaking and looking at those films, just contact me. I'm on Instagram, Maya Sandbar, and Chasing the Light Studio. We can recommend you films and connect you to other filmmakers. Really happy to do that.
Thanks a lot. Is there a question in the audience? No?
So one of the few things I've been thinking about is the impact of COVID-19. Obviously, large global pandemic, and has been absolutely horrendous for everyone across the world. One of the things that it makes me feel quite sort of reassured about is that, I think the same with the climate emergency, these things are no longer ignorable across the world. And the impact of people in Scotland, I work as a doctor and I've had patients coming in and asking me about how I feel about people in Africa getting vaccinated. And it's this kind of like waking up to what happens elsewhere has an impact on us and getting out of things. And I think the fact that it hasn't just gone away, is teaching people these things are unignorable. We're going to need to make long-term change. We're going to have to really, as you said, have a proper discussion. The second point I was going to make was that I think when people are in denial with regards to climate, we really need to, be reasonable to them and figure out what they're worried about. They probably aren't as idealistic as a lot of us. We need to think, what's their bottom line? Is that rising food prices? Is that them going on holiday? We need to show them the world that if we don't change anything, you know, this is what they're gonna have to live with, and that's one of the ways that you can just introduce it to them. Like, let's not get angry. Like, you know, planes didn't exist 120 years ago, and we've come a very long way as a species. So I was just wondering what the panel thought about other ways of speaking to people who might be in denial or maybe are struggling to come to terms with it.
That's a great question, and anyone can. I would pick up on one of the first things that you said about COVID and being a doctor, and it's really interesting because well, the one thing that we've learned over the last 2 years is that there is no borders or boundaries in that sense. Like someone from Africa and China can come here, and it just happens in a split second, you know. So a lot of my work is called Footsteps on the Wind, Voices on the Wind. You know, it's about the wind that travels. There's no borders around this planet, and so what happens in one place does affect the other. In terms of listening to others, I think you're right. There needs to be not an angry discussion, but a compassionate discussion in that sense, and listening to each other. You know, finding a place in which you listen and show the elements, but understand where the fears, because all governed by fear. What are you going to lose to do that? So really identifying the fears and how that affects that one person, and then empowering in the solution is a very good point. Yeah. Thanks for raising it. Anybody else?
Yeah, so talking, so I'm a climate change communication specialist, and so I talk with a bunch of different audiences who have different mindsets, different perspectives, and really it's all about understanding who you're talking to, where they're coming from, right? You can't just show this data of like 100 years that shows sea level rise that's happening in Hawaii, and for every audience you talk to and expect them to be like, oh my God, we should do something about it, right? Because that doesn't mean, it's just numbers and graphs for them. And so really, it's a lot about empathy, you know, looking where they come from and why do they have these perspectives. And again, it's about connecting the dots. Climate change is not an isolated issue. It touches various different topics and issues all around the world. And by understanding these connections, so understanding how climate change connects to public health, to environmental issues, to the housing crisis even. Like all of these different issues that we tend to think about in isolation are all connected. And understanding how they're connected can help us create this space of conversation rather than a hostile space where no one is being heard and nothing is being done.
Right, should we do one last online one? It's a slightly heavier one, but we've got a question from Brad from the UK, who's wondering how each of you manage climate anxiety.
That's a good one. The first time I discovered that I was going to lose everything because of climate change, I got very anxious and depressed, and at some points I have to admit that I was suicidal. I didn't want to continue living knowing that I wouldn't be able to tell my grandkids that we were from islands that already disappeared. And what has helped me is especially art and working with artists that are like-minded. In my case, I'm an artist, and my grandmothers make this kind of arts, very beautiful textiles, you know, and that's what I have grown with, and that's why I'm so passionate about art. But in the case of other people, it might be something else. It might be sports, or it might be going to museums or making music. So find something you like and trying to use that as your tool to fight climate change. And I'm pretty sure you will find other people that have the same values and the same skills you have, and make a collective. Start working together. When I had this idea, when I was in One Young World in 2014, to have a photo exhibition of the faces of the kids of my island that were the first climate displaced people, it was an idea that took me almost 3 years to accomplish. But on the first night of the exhibition, which was at the Hilton Hotel in Panama City, we had over 1,000 people. So it took me 3 years, and it took me to find the right people, but I, at some point, did it, and look where I am now.
Let me just build on that. So, like, pretty much all of us here know COP, right? Conference of Party. But probably some of us haven't really heard about Youngo and what the Conference of Youth is. So, just wanted to plug that in because it's really important, as Devi was saying, that to find people who really care about what you really care about and that you can support, lean, and learn from. So there are already existing communities out there, not just Youngo, but other, if you are like interested in music, that there obviously are. So look for what kind of community already are out there and see how you can contribute, connect with people, see what they are up to, basically see what the world is doing and how you can contribute to it. So look up COI, so that happens each COP. So we have been doing COI since, it's the 16th COI that happened this year. So 17th, 18th, and we'll continue with the COP. So if you are young people that is watching online, Google UK COI, and see what we did this year. And if you're interested for the next year, the COP will happening in Egypt. So COI will happen there as well. So just see if you are interested to meet the fellow people, young people especially, and how they are working in their own communities, in their own regions. So just connect with the people and see how you can contribute and how you can support and learn from each other. So.
Yeah, I love what's been said about community and reaching out. I think we haven't been together for a couple of years. We haven't been allowed to be together. So it's been the psychological thing has been taking over our minds. Mental health is a huge thing, and anxiety is a huge thing about fear of catching something, but also the planet's going to dust, and what are we going to do? And I think the planet's doing great still. We just have to make sure that we keep it on the right road, I think. So just being positive about it rather than... So lots can be done and will be done. But I think as an individual, if you're feeling anxious, you reach out, always reach out. There's so much out there that is available. Just look at the thing that is of interest to you, whether, as you said, music, sport, or art, or just hold someone's hand and just share your fear, share your anxiety, talk to someone about it, and the odds are that someone else will also share it. And if by sharing it, then you get it out there, and then you can find a way to just get through the day and be positive about what you can do.
Yeah, I would start by just saying that I'm really glad that climate anxiety is a topic which is being discussed now. I think it's something which many people have been feeling for a long time, but until recently it hasn't really been acknowledged as something that really exists. So, I mean, there's lots of different ways of handling it. I think for each person it's going to be different. For me personally, it's been taking action, being involved in something, feeling like I'm doing something, really kind of counters that feeling of not being able to do anything. I guess kind of going back to the drop in the ocean. It's a really good metaphor for that. So that's how I personally have managed to cope with it.
Yeah, climate anxiety, that is very real. I guess I want to share how I got involved, or how I first realized that climate change was something that we need to look more into. So when I was back home in Saipan in my junior year of high school, I did a research project that studied the coral reefs in Saipan. And I fell in love with the corals, these colorful living organisms that was home to so many of the marine ecosystems found in Saipan. And so I did my project, and then a year later, I went back. And when I went back to visit the corals that I learned to love, they were all bleach. There was a coral bleaching event that basically wiped out the corals that I studied for. And so that's when I realized that the world is really changing faster than we thought, and it really gave me a lot of anxiety, right? And And so something that really helped was that when I went to college, I got involved with our YMCA there. So the YMCA I'm part of is a campus-affiliated YMCA. So really a lot of the programs that we have were created and led by the youth, by students. And so because I found that sense of community, that allows me to thrive, that provides people like me a platform to do these projects to address the issues that I care about, is really helping with the anxiety of it all. Because you're a young people have so much to think about, right? We have the climate anxiety. On top of that, we have the pandemic now, and then just the struggles that come with trying to come in terms of identity and who you are and what your purpose is. And so it can be really overwhelming sometimes, but really finding that community that will help not just lift you up, but will lift up everyone together, and finding a way for you to be the best you can be and make the biggest impact that you can have. And so that really helped with helping navigate through life in general. But yeah.
Thank you so much, honestly, Dewey, Jamie, Diana, Durlab, Maya. Thank you so much for this session. It was great to have you. Thank you so much for the questions as well. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more, but thank you so much for being here, and thank you all as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.